a very good Tuesday to you, and I hope I find you very well indeed. Here in Manchester today, a very grey, miserable, nondescript kind of day. So not a lot to say there, so we shall move along. As promised in my I'm Back video, this video is going to be about a very important, or in my view what should be a very important thing here in the UK, which is the day is Thursday the 23rd of June 2016, and that is the day when the EU in or out referendum will take place here in the UK. Now, obviously, the EU referendum is not going to be of any great importance to anybody outside the UK. Excuse me. But hopefully, the video will be of a little bit of interest, because it'll kind of give you some insight as to what the EU is, what impact it has on the UK, or should I more importantly say, the impact that I see that it has on the UK. And whether, in my opinion, we are going to be better as a continued part of the European Union or on our own as we used to be many, many moons ago. This story always has a starting point, and the starting point for me regarding this was 1971, when Britain was forced, coerced, and whatever, to take on the decimal currency system, which obviously is everything is in multiples of tens, to make life a little bit easier for calculation of money, prices, etc., rather than our old pounds, shilling and pence system that we used to operate quite successfully for many, many decades, stroke centuries prior to 1971. We took on board decimalisation to bring us more in line with the calculus system in the rest of Europe, where everything was based on tens, stroke hundreds of cents and lira and all that kind of thing. And we had the new pence system brought in. I remember clearly at that point in time that once the decimalisation system came in, all prices were rounded up rather than down. So for working class people, people like my parents who were on very low incomes at the time, probably in 1971, I guess my dad was probably on maybe 12, 15 pounds a week, running a house, having a son, having a wife, paying rent, and so on and so forth. And he went from a certain way of measuring his income on pounds, shillings and pence to the new decimal system, where everything was rounded up by half a penny to the nearest new pence. Now, half a penny might not sound much, but it did make quite a lot of difference to the pound in the pocket of the working man. Over the last 30 years, we in the UK have seen quite a lot of interference from what was initially called the common market, where in 1973 we were taken into the common market by Prime Minister Edward Heath, who basically bulldozed the British public into accepting the joining of the common market, basically saying that it would be a very, very good deal for the UK to be part of the of Europe, of mainland Europe, enabling us to travel freely, trade freely, and that would affect prices beneficially for all of us, because there would be no import duties payable on goods that were coming into the UK from other fellow members of the common market. What has happened since then? And we're edging on the territory of conspiracy theories here, which is a conspiracy theory that is knocking around quite a lot and gaining a lot of traction, is that what the elite want is a one world government. And what it seems to be at the moment is, as we're well aware, we have the United States of America, where you have a group of people, all from different states, all living under one flag, and that is fine and dandy-o, because at the end of the day, they are all Americans, citizens of the United States. Now, they also now want a United States of Europe. Now, the idea of that, of course, is that we all live happily under one flag, being legislated by one government who are based in Brussels or Strasbourg, by laws made by what appear to be unelected bureaucrats sat in their ivory towers telling the people of Europe what we can do. The problem with that is this, is that even though the United States of America works, it is my feeling that it works because you are all of one people. You are all born and bred on the one continent of North America. You all live under the same governmental rules. Yes, I appreciate that different state legislation comes into place and so on and so forth. Whereas here in Europe, we are a community of many, many different countries with many, many different languages, many, many different traditions, many different dialects to those languages, and many, many different ways of actually living our lives. And some of us, namely the UK, is actually not part of continental Europe. We are, as you know, a small little rock in the North Atlantic, living quite quietly on our own, north of continental Europe, to the east of Iceland and to the west of Norway. So we are not connected at all. So geographically, the point that we are actually not, there's no land bridge to continental Europe with the United Kingdom, is an actual problem for me. We are, by geography, completely separate to the rest of Europe. We also have a completely different way of living. You tend to find that island dwellers, people who are surrounded by sea, tend to have a slightly different outlook on life than do landlocked nations. We are explorers by nature because we have to be. Because we here in Britain are a small country, we depend on trade from everywhere, trade from continental Europe, trade from America, trade from India and China and wherever else. And all those trade links have been generated by us going out there over the centuries, forming what was the greatest empire known to man, and all those trade links are still in place, and we still survive from those trade links. What the EU are now saying is that we should be brought into the fold and live happily as one, when we have so many different flags and peoples and languages and traditions, where we are going to struggle bringing all those together in one cohesive population. To give you an idea where kind of I'm coming from, I have quite an axe to grind with the idea of a united Europe. And that's because over the last 10 or 15 years, it's become clear to me that we don't seem to get a lot from our membership of the EU. A lot of the northern European countries, such as France, etc., will get quite a lot of money from the Common Agricultural Policy market, where money is given to French farmers to generate crops and support their vineyards, etc. I feel that certain countries in continental Europe are expected to support failing countries in Europe, and by that I mean Germany, being the main economic powerhouse of Europe, have had to sign up where they will agree to help and support financially any and all member states who are suffering from lack of money, lack of jobs, and so on and so forth. And we've seen that recently with places like Greece and Portugal and the Republic of Ireland. And poor old Germany, unfortunately, because they are the economic powerhouse of continental Europe, having to shell out more money into the pot, as it were, to help support the failing economies. Fortunately, here in Britain, we, being completely separate to them, are not put under as much pressure to support failing economies. So that, to me, is a very positive thing. The independence that we can carry forward not only will help us keep hold of our national identity, the 4 national identities here in the United Kingdom, of course, but also that we will not be pressurised to support economies that are failing, either due to lack of markets for countries that don't have anything to trade, or for currencies that are badly managed by their governments. Here in the UK, it's very, very hard for us to actually obtain any figures as to what benefits there are to us as a fully fledged member of the EU. The Office of National Statistics find it very, very difficult to put records out there giving true and accurate figures of what we actually get as a country. But what I could find out over the last couple of days is that in 2015, so the last financial year, the EU took from us, so the taxpayers of the UK, £13 billion. Now, I'm assuming that is the American billion, 1,000 billion. I doubt very much it's a UK billion, which is a million. So they took from us in funds into the UK, into the EU, £13 billion sterling. What the EU gave us back in other means of aid into Great Britain was a total of £4.5 billion sterling, which means that we invested 13 billion into the coffers and only got 4.5 billion back. So the EU are better off by a margin of 8.5 billion pounds. Now, I'm not too sure whether that appears like a good deal to you, because it certainly doesn't seem like a good deal to me. The problem is that we, as the electorate here in the UK, are not allowed to get our hands on any official figures, and I believe that is a purposeful thing done by the government of the day, any government of the day, not just the current one. The Office of National Statistics don't like giving figures out, so we have to ask the question: is it worth it? Is it economically worth us of the UK being members of the EU, given that we are constantly being squeezed at the moment by the government of the day, Mr. George Osborne, Chancellor of the Exchequer in particular, who is making cuts to this and cuts to that and cuts to the other, and education is suffering, and health is suffering, and benefits are suffering, and everything's suffering because we are struggling for money, because there was no money in the coffers. And yet we can still afford to pay £13 billion in the last financial year into an organisation that appears to me not to be giving a lot back to us here in the UK. Since joining the common market back in 1973, I wonder if you have any idea, can you take an educated guess as to how much we've actually paid into the pot? So this is going from the days where it was called the Common Market, and then to the Economic Community, the European Economic Community, the EEC, and then to its latest incarnation, the EU, the European Union. No, you can't. let me tell you, it is reckoned, as I say, records are hard to find, but it is reckoned that the UK have paid in a roughly accurate figure of £350 billion. 350 billion. Now, that's actually quite a lot of money, and it would be amazing to speak to some form of economist here in the UK to find out what we could have achieved with that 350 billion had we not paid that into the EU. Will it cause us any problems not being in the EU? If the vote goes against it, will it cause any problems? Well, let me put this into a prime kind of focus for you here. The figure that I quoted that we paid into the EU, if the total figure wasn't shocking enough for you, what it equates to is that the taxpayers here in the UK are paying the EU £23 million per day. £23 million per day. So let's put it this way. What a lot of people are actually saying at the moment is that if we in the referendum say no, we want out, that all our trade links will suffer. It may take 8, 9, 10 years to put agreements in place to allow us to have free movement of goods and transit within the UK and the rest of the European Union. They say that there will be interparliamentary problems if we pull out, and that free movement of for migrants, both financial and legal migrants, will be slowed down. Well, as we're seeing at the moment, there are major problems with migrant traffic, initially caused by, of course, Angela Merkel of Germany basically saying, come one, come all, and we'll take everybody. And then, of course, we had the complete influx, which obviously, I don't know whether she looked ahead that might happen, but it did. We also are at the point now where if we decide to stay, we will be forced yet again to take on board another currency change. So we went from pounds, shillings and pence to decimalisation, and we will be forced yet again to go to the euro. Now the problem is with the euro, of course, or the good thing with the euro perhaps, let me try and be positive here, is that you have one currency that can be used everywhere in the EU. Fine, not a problem at all. That is controlled by EU central government. But the downside with that, of course, is that if you have economic problems in your country, the rate of exchange stays the same. Whereas if you have control over your own currency and life is getting a little bit difficult, you can actually downvalue your own currency to make overseas trade more attractive to the buyer. So somebody in Germany could perhaps buy from Britain because we've downvalued the pound to make things cheaper for him or her to buy. You cannot do that with a centrally controlled currency. You just can't. So will it be more difficult for us to trade? Well, many moons ago, back in the 70s and the 80s, I used to be in international freight. And during those days, there was no such thing as one currency. Everybody had their own currency. The Italians had lira, the Germans had the Deutschmark, and we had pounds and so on and so forth. Now, there was a document. In fact, there was a number of documents. One was called a T form. There was a T1 and a T2 form. And what a T1 and a T2 form did, the T stood for transit. And T1 and T2 allowed free and unfettered travel for goods and services between all agreed European and international countries. So those in the common market as it was then, and those on the borders of the common market, you know, Yugoslavia, the old Yugoslavia, the old Czechoslovakia, Romania, and that kind of thing. And either a T1 or a T2 form allowed free unfettered transit of those goods. We also had something called the EFTA Agreement, EFTA, and that stood for the European Free Trade Association, which was an agreement between all and many European countries that we would have free trade between all of us, absolutely. And all you would need is something called an import license, which was stamped by the country of export, so let's say France, for instance. It then came with the goods into the UK. It was then signed and authorised by the shipping agent, i.e. me, and then signed and authorised by the customs and excise people to ensure that no duty was paid on those goods that had come from France, Germany, Holland, or wherever. The only thing that was payable at that particular point in time was VAT, which was European-wide, which at the time was 8%, and as you may or may not be aware if you're outside the UK or outside Europe, VAT is now 20%. Yes, a whole fifth of the cost of any £1 or €1 is added to anything that you buy. So it seems logical to me that if back in the 70s and early 80s we had such a sophisticated system as the European Free Trade Association and an import license, why should it take 8 or 9 years to actually put something like that back in force again, ensuring that free trade will still be encountered by any and all members of the European community? Do I feel that we will gain anything at all from not being members of the EU? No, and I'll tell you the reason why is that it was my understanding that if you were a registered member of the EU and you lived within that community, you would have free transit, unfettered transit if you wanted to travel. And I understood that it was going to be as simple as producing your driving license, for instance, that you could travel everywhere. Is that the case? No, it's not. You still have to have a passport, which is complete and utter nonsense. If you have free transit within your community, you should need no documentation other than something as simple as a driving license, which shows your face, your name, your date of birth, your address, and your country of residence. And if that country of residence is within the EU, then you should be able to travel wherever and whenever you please. And that has never come to fruition. And that amazes me in a community which puts itself forward as a free and democratic body. The other problem with the EU, of course, is that we have no idea who runs the EU. There seems to be a lot of people out there who are not elected by us. Yes, there are MEPs, members of the European Parliament, who are indeed elected by different electorates in different countries. Absolutely. But there are also people on the European Council who people don't know who they are, how they got the position, whether they're receiving any backhanders from anybody to put certain legislation through, and whether that has any sort of adverse effect on any country of the EU. So the problem that I see here is what they're trying to do is force many and all different character traits, languages, nationalities, languages, all under one umbrella to live as one. And that I don't think is going to be able to be achieved. Certainly because the language we speak denotes our nationality, our heritage, our history. And without that, we just become this conglomerate of nothing. Many years ago, there was a gentleman who tried to develop a universal language for Europe, and the language was called Esperanto. And Esperanto, although there was a number of speakers of Esperanto, was kicked out universally by Europe as a whole, because people wanted, quite rightly, to keep hold of their national identity, which indeed was their language and all dialects of that language. So we are being forced to give up our national identity, in my view. We've been forced to change so much in the last 30 or 40 years that I recall things were being changed, in my view, for the worse, in my view. I think if more people get out and vote on this particular item than people can be bothered to vote on general election, I think it will be the wisest thing they do. And it will be even wiser if they vote to stay independent. We are a little island race, and as long as we are a little island race, we have control of ourselves. And all the other countries in Europe should have never surrendered to the euro. They should have kept their own currencies to allow them the freedom to control their own economic welfare. But they surrendered that right, so what they ideally need to do now is try to regain some of their own independence. And the more the EU is allowed to grow, and it is growing more and more now, there's more and more countries joining the EU than ever before, the harder it's going to be recognised as an independent nation within this group of nations. So I do hope that on the 23rd of June that people do vote no. Unusually for me, I will vote, and I will vote no, because I don't feel that being sucked into the EU is necessarily a good thing for an independent race like the United Kingdom. So that's it for this one. I know it's a little bit of a heavy one, this. I will be interested to hear your opinions from wherever you are. You know, if you're in Europe and you think Europe's the greatest thing that ever happened, you know, let me know. Let me know, and let me know why. If you're in America and you weren't aware of, you know, what the EU was and kind of how much it costs people, I can only speak for us here in the UK, but you know what it costs us and what we get back for that, let me know. If you agree with me, let me know, and let me know whether you're going to bother voting. If you disagree with me, let me know, and let me know whether you're going to vote, and let me know why you disagree with me. Let me know what you feel the benefits of being in the EU have been and will be if we become full members. Do you really want the euro as our currency? Let me know. Anyway, that's it for this one, guys. Put all your questions, queries, ideas, suggestions down below. Can we sort out this EU problem between us? Who knows? I somehow doubt it. Any further suggestions for this kind of nonsense, by all means, drop them below. I will read them with delight, and I'll answer everybody who replies. That's it for this one. If you've liked it, give it a thumbs up. If it's your first time here, it's not all about politics. There's some bits about watches, and there's bits about this and bits about that, and science and conspiracy theories, alternative theories, all sorts of stuff in the back, and there will be more to come in the future. So if you're liking what you're seeing, feel free to subscribe. So for now, that's it, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.